Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
Hi, and welcome to Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into the Apologetic Zone, Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, where we do training, where we focus our training on critical thinking, scripture, history, logic, plain old common sense. All of that's brought to bear to help us to be able to explain our faith with charity and clarity and confidence. And welcome aboard. It's great to be with you today. It's always fun doing this program. Like I say, it's got to be the shortest hour in Catholic radio because it just seems like we start and before you know it, we're done. And got a great show in store for you today. We're going to try things from a different angle. Jesus. Who is Jesus? How do we know about Jesus? Of course, as Christians, we look at the New Testament, which has undergone a lot of criticism, but has really not only survived, but survived very boldly against historical criticism, that there's a solid historical basis for understanding who Jesus was, what he taught, and that he lived. There's other versions of Jesus. For example, there is the Jesus in the Quran of Islam. And to join us today, we're going to take a look at both of these things from a unique angle because our good friend and master apologist William Albrecht will be coming into the dojo. And he just recently debated Islamic apologist on Jesus in the New Testament, the Quran, which is more reliable. So he's going to share with us some of his thoughts on that. And I love it because it forces us to kind of look at things from different angles and always learn a lot when you do that. Also, we're going to have our facing the fallacy. We're going to find the fallacy today in the appeal to flattery. And also, we're going to meet the early church father, Caesar of Arles. And actually, I got a really interesting story about Caesar of Arles that I think will probably help kind of put some flesh and bones on his father, so to speak, make him a little bit more palpable and understandable. And it's great. I think, why don't we do our shout-outs? Because on the corner of my eye, on this section of the dojo, for those watching, this is the section of the dojo which is the live stream portion, social media portion. So whenever you see me, if you're watching me, when I turn this direction, I'm looking at the chat room, and I already have the explosion of emojis. I want to welcome everybody watching Hands-On Apologetics live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Great to see familiar names. Very nice emojis. Apparently, today it's going to be cat emojis. I think that's going to be the... yeah. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. I think that's going to be the theme, apparently, because at least there seems to be lots of kittens in the last explosion. Also, I want to thank you, the listener, listening on radio or perhaps podcast. Welcome aboard, and it should be a lot of fun today. Lots of interesting topics to explore, and as always, you are part of the program. So if you have a question, especially for our guest, William Albrecht, give us a call at 888-526-2151. That's 888-526-2151. Love to hear from you. And I should also mention the dojo mailbox. Yes, the dojo mailbox is filling up, folks, because people are emailing the show and the sensei, myself, with questions and comments and ideas on sharing and explaining the faith. Lots of good stuff coming in. And if you want to send an email, send it to questions@handsonapologetics.com. That's questions@handsonapologetics.com. And also, on Facebook, I got somebody messaged me and said, I want to watch your program, but I'm not sure exactly how to access it. I missed a bunch of programs. Yeah, how can I listen to some of your past shows? Well, the answer, ladies and gentlemen, is the official website of Virgin Most Powerful Radio, virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Just jump on that website, click on our shows, and scroll down to Hands-On Apologetics, and you can access all the shows that we've done here on the program. Lots of great guests, very interesting topics, and it's all right there. You can download it, you can listen to it. You can listen to the show live. You can do all sorts of stuff on that thing. Not only my show, but also all the other great shows like Terry and Jesse's show, Jesus 911, all the great stuff that we produce. So just FYI, if you're listening on the radio and you're thinking, boy, I won't be able to hear the whole thing, you can get to it on virginmostpowerfulradio.org. All right, so let's jump to the finding of the fallacy, which is the appeal to flattery. Now, appeal to flattery. I know everybody has encountered this in one form or another. The appeal to flattery is a fallacy in which a person uses flattery, excessive compliments, in an attempt to appeal to the audience's vanity to win support for their side. It is also known as apple polishing, wheel greasing, and all sorts of other things. So, yeah, this is a common one, isn't it? Especially with public addresses, sermons, debates, definitely in debates, public debates, and maybe even in advertising. And basically all it is where you couch your argument in a way that is flattering to the audience, where they'll say, see, I see that every intelligent person here in the audience will see that my argument is the correct one. Or they might say, I'm surrounded by all these great Bible-believing Christians and saved by grace, and as Bible-believing Christians, we know that this position is true. Or it could be anything. But basically what it is using flattery, excessive compliments, in order to persuade people rather than evidence and arguments. That's really the bottom line. So I know kids sometimes use flattery. I know people do too. But, it can be a fallacy. It can actually be a wrong way of persuading people. So that's a good FYI right there. And that's the finding of the fallacy for today, the appeal to flattery. Let's go to the Meet the Early Church Father, who is St. Caesar of Arles, who lived, he was born sometime around 470, died around 8542. Now here's an interesting interesting point. I was hanging around with Marcus Grodi the other day, and he said, hey, have you ever heard of Caesarius of Arles? Now, I didn't put the name together because I know him as Caesar of Arles, not Caesarius. For some reason, it just didn't click. So he pulled out a book, and he started telling me about this early church father, who just so happens to be the early church father for today. And he was born he was Bishop of Arles. And what Marcus was telling me was what's significant about this early church father. He's a very solid Orthodox Catholic bishop, and Arles was located between to the south is Italy, in Rome, of course, and to the north you have Germany, you have France, and England. So it's like if you wanted to travel to the Vatican or back, you would travel through Arles, his diocese. And Caesarius was disappointed because he felt like the bishops really weren't trained and well educated enough to deliver great homilies. So what he started doing was he started writing down his own homilies, and he would give these works to the priests and bishops passing through his diocese. Well, what happens is that he becomes incredibly influential because all his sermons, priests, if they couldn't make a proper sermon or a homily, they would just read Caesarius or Caesar's homilies. And so, it was great stuff. He vigorously opposed heresies like semi-Pelagianism, all sorts of great stuff. And so Marcos was pointing out some cool things. Like, for example, in one of his homilies, he says that if your neighbor is worshiping a tree, you should get an axe and chop it down. And it's interesting that Boniface in Germany, what's he famous for? Cutting down a tree that was worshipped, So lots of interesting stuff. He was incredibly influential. He also presided over one of my favorite councils of the church, which is kind of a not very well-known council called Second Orange, or the Second Council of Orange, which met in 529. And I love the canons of that because it condemns semi-Pelagianism. And the canons there are really like every Catholic should recite to a Protestant, because they really do clear up exactly what we mean by grace and works, what we can do without grace, what we can do without grace. And I find it to be very helpful in apologetics. So he presided over this council. He's especially well known for his works of charity. St. Caesar himself lived in perfect poverty while distributing to the poor and using for ransom of captives all such wealth that came to him. A Valuable Life of St. Caesar, it's in 2 volumes. It was written by 5 friends of his, so we have a pretty decent record of his life and exploits. But yeah, that was providential. That out of the blue, he would bring up this particular early church father and give me this really cool history that I never knew about. And it just turns out, folks, by divine providence, that right here, a couple days later, we're talking about the same early church father. So that is St. Caesar of Arles in the 5th century for our Meet the Early Church Fathers. Great stuff. I always, you never learn everything. There's always new things you discover. So that's just cool little factoids about him. Coming up on the other side of the break, Master Apologist William Albrecht of patristicpillars.com is coming on the show to talk about Jesus, the New Testament, and the Quran. So stay tuned.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. There's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet 3 men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites The Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands on Apologetics. Yes, time flies when you're having fun, and the fun continues because we're going to have with us today, actually for the first time ever via Skype for Hands on Apologetics, is Master Apologist William Albrecht. William himself is a convert to the faith. He's an international speaker and debater and has participated in over 50 live and moderated debates. William runs a website dedicated to the early church fathers, which includes unique translations, articles, commentaries, debates with the fathers. Also, he has his own debates on there. And his website, check it out, folks. It is www.patristicpillars.com. And William Albrecht, welcome to Hands on Apologetics.
Gary, it is great to be on. Looks like they're getting the video working pretty well there.
Yeah, I figured, it's there's going to be some rough spots, but hey, it's good to see you finally.
Definitely, without a doubt. We're going to have a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I always introduce you as a Catholic debater who has been out there for years and done dozens and dozens of debates on all sorts of subjects. And when we were talking about what subject to do for this program, you mentioned that you had recently debated an Islamic scholar, I believe you said was in England?
Yes, I have debated the gentleman Musharraf many times, a few times over there, and a few times on live radio. And we've got a couple of more that are coming up very soon. We'll be debating him. We're trying to get something arranged in Texas and another one over there as well. So I've debated him a number of times, and he is a Muslim and Islamic scholar. Always fun debating with him.
So what was the thesis of the debate?
We debated the difference of Christ in the Bible as opposed to the Quran. Which one would represent a more accurate representation of Jesus? And of course, I argue that the Christian position does. I think that we've got the Bible, which has more historical pedigree. And of course, we've got the fathers to back us up. We have early history. And as you know, Gary, in your book, we also have the enemies that can attest to the truth of Christ.
Right. So was it a well-attended debate? Did your opponent surprise you?
He didn't surprise me. But whenever debating a Muslim, they are always very well attended. Their people are very very devout, and they travel very well.
Yeah. So I take it the audience was decidedly mostly Islamic rather than Christian, or what would the percentages be?
I would say maybe about 80-20, 80% Muslim, 20% Christian. But, I don't have a problem with that because the more people within Islam that you reach, the better. And I've had a number of individuals that have reached out to me since that debate. I've had two that have told me that they are considering converting, which is great, which is fantastic. And that's always wonderful. Really, nothing special that I'm doing. It's all the work of the Holy Spirit and really the truth that you're conveying, the truth that we can find in the Holy Catholic Church.
Yeah, very good. So I know most Catholics and most people who are listening to this program probably never even picked up a Quran and read it, let alone tried to see what the Quran has to say about Jesus. So I guess the first place we should probably start is what are the key differences between the Jesus of the Bible and the Jesus of the Quran?
Well, there are a lot, really a lot. But what I like to focus on are what I call the three essentials, and not to say there are no others, but three essentials that I like to focus on are the incarnation, how Jesus died, and of course what Paul would call the pillar of our faith, which was the resurrection. And if we look at those three, we have very key differences with those three, and those three separate Islam and Catholicism and really any Orthodox form of Christianity, really.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, because that is those are really the core. It's God becomes man in the incarnation. Jesus offers his sacrifice on the cross, so he suffers and dies, and then ultimately the glorification. Boy, if you take those three, William, out, you have a completely different religion.
You've got a big problem there if you take those three out. I would argue that you said it there. You've got a completely different religion, and that is why Christianity is so diametrically opposed to Islam and vice versa, really. Yeah. As much as there is alike, you can find similarities. There are key things that are very different, and these are, as you know, Gary, these are very important.
Yeah, very good. So while we, for the first segment, why don't we talk a little bit about the incarnation? What exactly, let's define, what is the incarnation?
Well, the incarnation, I always love hopping to the compendium, to the catechism. The catechism tells us in section 214, God is truth itself, and such he can neither deceive nor be deceived. He is light, and in him there is no darkness. The eternal Son of God, the incarnation of wisdom, was sent into the world to bear witness to the truth. And then when we hop down a little bit, we go to New Advent, which is the Catholic Encyclopedia. When we talk about the incarnation, we find three very key things. The incarnation implies three things. One, the divine person of Jesus. Two, and very important, the human nature of Jesus. And three, where we also diverge from Islam, the hypostatic union of the human with the divine nature in the divine person of Jesus Christ. And that third one there, Gary, that third one is a very sticky point with Muslims, but it is one that is foundational to our faith.
Yeah, very good. So it's so those are kind of the three pillars of the incarnation: the divine person, the human nature, united to the divine nature through the hypostatic union. Yeah, very Correct. Good. So, so where do we go from there? So that obviously is reflected in John's prologue in John 1, right?
Definitely. And, we can go all over the Bible to find it. We can even find it in the Old Testament and Isaiah. But really, when dialoguing with Muslims, you want to kind of hop into the New Testament, because if you go directly into Isaiah, they're going to tell you, well, that's revisionism. You're looking at it, you're reinterpreting it. So we can hop into John 1. And John 1 is very clear, in my opinion, Gary. John 1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was made nothing that was made. To me, Gary, really, that's as clear as can be. I mean, The teaching of the incarnation is very clear there. But for whatever reason or another, Muhammad didn't adopt that teaching, because we know Muhammad borrowed a lot from the Bible. He rejected that particular teaching, I would argue, because Muhammad had a lot of trouble grasping the doctrine of the Trinity. Due to his cultural surroundings, he really didn't understand it. He thought Mary was a part of the Trinity. That in and of itself shows you he didn't have a proper grasp of the faith.
Yeah, that's problematic, to say the least.
Yeah.
So but he. What is it that the Quran does accept and doesn't accept?
Right. The Quran will tell you, if you open up the Quran to 1919, you're going to read that Mary is receiving the gift of a holy son. So the Quran does teach the virgin birth. And if you hop on over to one verse later, it says, how shall I have a son, seeing that no man has touched me, and I am not unchaste? The Quran does teach the virgin birth, but the Quran very strongly denies the incarnation. In fact, section 359 says, the likeness of Jesus in Allah's eye is as the likeness of Adam. He created him of dust, then he said to him, be, and he is. That for us, Gary, is not only offensive, but really contrary to the faith, because we know very well that Jesus was not created from dust. We know that Christ, as the book of Revelation tells us, is the chief creator. He is the head of all creation. He is eternal God. And that verse right there, in and of itself, denies the incarnation. There is much more, but that is a clear denial. Whereas the virgin birth is accepted, the incarnation is denied.
Interesting. And also in Genesis, Adam isn't created by a fiat like the other parts of creation. He's shaped and God breathes spirit into him. So that's kind of interesting too. That they mistakenly say that Adam was created by fiat.
Yes, that's correct. And that really, to me, Gary, that does get to the heart of the issue. When you can tell there is an issue being able to properly handle the biblical text by Muhammad. Because as a Catholic, as any individual that has studied the issue, we can tell whether it be Muhammad or whatever position you want to take, whoever it was that was dictating this, whoever it was that was writing this, did not have a proper grasp, not only of the Christian faith, Gary, but of Judaism. There was not a proper grasp of either.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And it also, does the Quran also explain the relationship of the virgin birth to the incarnation?
Right.
Elsewhere?
Yes. In fact, looking in area 4, 171 and 472, and 172, excuse me, you read, and this, to me, Gary, this shows you a direct attempt to refute what we believe when you read, "O people of the book," not talking just about Christians, but including Jews as well, "commit no excesses in your religion or utter anything concerning Allah but the truth. The Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, was only a messenger of Allah. His word that he sent to Mary and a spirit from him that he sent. So believe in Allah and his messengers and do not say three. Desist, it is better for you. Allah is one God. Far exalted is he above having offspring. He is all that is in the heavens and all in the earth. Allah is sufficient, a disposer of affairs. The Messiah would never scorn to be a servant to Allah, nor would the angels who are nearest to Allah. As for those who scorn his service and are arrogantly proud, he shall gather them all to himself to answer." So, Gary, what do we have here? We have an attack against Judaism, against Christianity, and then we have a misunderstanding when the Quran says that God is three, in the sense of three gods, and then kind of like, okay, a refutation of the Catholicism by saying, desist, Allah is one God. Well, we believe that God is one. So it is a complete misunderstanding, whereas there is an attempt there to refute the incarnation, Gary. It shows directly that there is a misunderstanding of the faith.
Yeah, true. And also that he's above having offspring. And so they understand it more like carnally rather than, spiritual generation.
They do, Gary. And in debate, they will strongly defend that. They will try to argue that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John taught that.
Well, yeah, very good. Hey, well, I hear the music coming up. We're talking with Master Apologist William Albrecht about Jesus in the New Testament and the Quran. Stay tuned, folks. A lot more to come after the break.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. You know, there's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet three men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We are talking with Master Apologist William Albrecht and about Jesus in the New Testament and the Quran. And we just kind of looked at both very briefly in regards to the incarnation, how the New Testament very clearly affirms that God assumed human nature, and then the Quran, although it accepts the virgin birth, very explicitly says that God doesn't have offspring and that Jesus was just a man. Now, William, so I guess someone could say, okay, well, we have the Quran and we have the New Testament. How do we know which version is true?
Very, very good question, Gary. And that does get us to the heart of the issue, where I like to point out that the early church, those that knew the apostles, those that knew the people that knew Jesus the best, are a great witness. And one individual that I love to really hearken to, Gary, is Ignatius of Antioch. And I know you love to as well, and heard it in your debates and your written work. And as you know, Gary, Ignatius is a very important character. He wrote around, I think about maybe 105 AD, around there. And in one particular area, I love to point people to his letter to Polycarp, who, another very important figure, by the way, who knew John, which is incredible, isn't that, Gary? We've got this chain of the chain that goes right to the head, which is Jesus Christ. And Ignatius in chapter 3 says, "Look for him who is above all time, eternal and invisible, yet who became visible for our sake, impalpable and impassible, yet who became passible on our account, and who in every kind of way suffered for our sake." So if you look to Ignatius, and not only him, Gary, you know this very well, look to anyone in the early church, they attest to the fact of the incarnation. You've got the enemies that of course, don't believe in it, but they attest to the fact that this was believed at a very early time in history. So the Quran really is several hundred years later attempting to refute something that was already firmly entrenched in the faith because it was a truth of the faith.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I could testify that absolutely the early church fathers and the enemies of the church is decidedly, I think, against that position. So that's the first pillar, is the incarnation. The second pillar is Christ's suffering and death.
Yes, and as you know, Gary, we all believe that Jesus died by crucifixion. He was crucified. He was hung on a cross, crucified, and he truly did inspire. He didn't seem to die. He truly did die. And I think if you look at the Bible, you can hop onto Luke 23, 33 to 43. Luke will tell you what was firmly believed. Luke tells you when they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right and the other on the left. But Jesus was saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots, dividing up his garments among themselves, and the people stood by looking on. And even the rulers were sneering at him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself, if this is the Christ of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up to him, offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." Now there was also an inscription above him that read, "This is the King of the Jews." So we can read here, Gary, that Those that believed in Jesus knew that he was going to die on the cross. And even the enemies knew that he was going to die, because what do they say, Gary? They say, if you are truly the Christ, save yourself now. They know that he's going to expire on that cross. He's going to die by crucifixion.
Yeah, yeah, very good. And again, you could go all over the New Testament, all of it, no matter what source, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, that Jesus died through crucifixion. So yeah, that's pretty much incontestable as far as New Testament evidence. But what does the Quran say about Jesus' death by crucifixion?
I'd recommend people go to the Quran, Area 4, 157, 158, and 159. Well, you're going to find, very interestingly, it says, and for their saying, remember, they're refuting what we believe. We have killed the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of God. In fact, they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it appeared to them as if they did. Indeed, those who differ about him are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge of it, except the following assumptions. Certainly they did not kill him. Rather, God raised him up to himself. God is mighty and wise. There is none from the people of the scripture but will believe in him before his death. And on the day of resurrection, he will be a witness against them. So what is this saying, Gary? Is that this is saying, first off, there was obviously an attempt to kill him. They do agree with that, but they don't believe he died. They don't believe he resurrected. He didn't die by crucifixion, wasn't resurrected. He will come again. What we read in Area 159, Gary, where it says the day of resurrection, that is kind of like a general one where not only Christ, but many others will rise again. But they don't believe that he bodily rose from the dead.
Oh, that's odd.
Yeah, they don't believe he was true. We'll get to the resurrection later, but they don't believe
right.
he was truly crucified, which really, correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, but I think even the enemies of the faith, as your book shows, even they attest to the fact that Jesus was killed by being crucified.
Right. Yeah. So why they believe that Jesus was simply a human being, although he did have a miraculous birth. I'm just kind of trying to see logic, and why not allow say he's crucified?
Well, I think really if they were to accept the fact that Jesus of Nazareth was truly crucified and truly rose bodily from the dead, then it would mean that everything that Jesus said, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, everything that he said was indeed true. And if we were to take that for granted, that he indeed bodily rose from the dead and everything he said was true, then it must also be true that he was God incarnate. And they cannot accept that. That's all a chain, which really you've got to wonder. They have great veneration of Mary, but they will accept the Immaculate Conception, so many other things, but they won't adopt the teaching that Mary is Theotokos, Mother of God, because then all of this falls in line. And they believed that we were polytheists. They did not truly grasp the teaching of the Trinity, and in turn rejected essential teachings of the faith.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. So, okay, William, so we have the New Testament. Jesus suffered, died on the cross, and you have the Quran that says that it's that Allah did not allow this to happen. So how do we know which one's true?
I like to go to the enemies of the faith, which I'm going to put a plug in for your book. You did a great book on hostile witnesses, and you point to these things, Gary. A great book. I love plugging your works. I know you don't tell me to do it, but it's a great book. And what that shows us, Gary, what does it show us? If we can point to an enemy who really has no reason to support our thesis, and their testimony proves our faith correct, we can really rest our head on something. And if you look to Josephus, who was writing his Antiquities around 90 AD, in chapter 18:3, what does he say? Remember, some of what Josephus wrote, there are individuals that will argue that there are interpolations, but the majority of scholars recognize this to be authentic. And this says, now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, he drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross. What is that condemnation that Josephus is talking about? It is a condemnation of death by crucifixion.
Yeah, very good. So this is a Jewish historian writing around 100 AD who affirms that is, and he has no skins in the game. It doesn't matter, whether Jesus was crucified or not. Yeah, very good. Where else could you go?
Well, I love to go to another individual because I know that there are some Muslim scholars which go against the grain of all other scholars and will just try to toss Josephus out the window altogether. If they do take that tact, I love going to Tacitus, who wrote his Annals in 110 AD, around 105, 110. And he tells us, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, talking about Christ, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And the death that is being spoken of there is, of course, Christ being died by being crucified. But we have yet another witness here, Gary, that recognized that this individual, Jesus the Christ, was murdered, was killed on a cross. So you have, we don't even have to go to the Bible or to the early church fathers if we want to prove our point, Gary. We can go to the enemies of the faith who, as you pointed out, Gary, they've got no stake in this at all.
Yeah, very good. Well, we have a phone call. Why don't we go to the phone call? It's Therese from Monrovia, California. Therese, welcome to Hands On Apologetics.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. My question for your guest is, and forgive me if you had already covered this, I have been studying about the Spanish Inquisition, and the amount of people, of course, has been greatly exaggerated that were killed in the Inquisition. But correct. I still found it disturbing that 3,000 to 5,000 Jews and Muslims and Protestants were killed over, I guess, a few centuries. So I went and looked up some information on Catholic.com, and it states in the Bible, they gave a Bible verse in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 6. But that prophet or that dreamer shall be put to death, because in order to lead you astray away from the Lord your God has directed you to take, he has preached apostasy from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and ransomed you from the place of slavery. Thus shall you purge the evil from your midst. And it reminded me of what it says in the Quran to kill the infidel, and I wondered if we are any different.
Okay, yeah, very good question. I hear the music coming up. Can you hold on past the break, Teresa? Okay, thank you.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. You know, there's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now are saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet three men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back to Hands-on Apologetics. And so we have a caller. Let me try to summarize your question. And if I get it wrong, please correct me. Is that you were wondering because in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy, there's prescriptions to slay false prophets and so on. And you notice there's also in the Quran the so-called sword surahs where slay the infidel wherever you find them. Is there similarity, differences? Is that basically the question?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay. William, do you have a comment?
Definitely, I definitely do. And I would add, there are many other passages that you can find that are in the similar vein, Teresa, in the Old Testament. Our issue would be this, Teresa. We would need to look at the context of what is being talked about in the Old Testament. And in just about every area where we do read about individuals that are being killed or individuals that are being wiped out, we do know, as tough as it may sound, that it is for the better good that this is occurring. Because if you read the context, a lot of these individuals are very, very violent. A lot of them are very evil, and a lot of them are attempting to do harm to God's people. So this isn't a matter of God appearing and God wiping out individuals because they, they might have committed a tiny little sin, or they were just bad people. These were terrible people. These were people that were hell bent on wiping out the people of God. In a lot of instances, these are people hell bent on wiping out full villages. And there are areas as well where you read about young children. The English will read young children that are killed. But really, if you go back to the original text, you read that they're not little children. These are people that are maybe around 19, 20 years old that are committing horrific crimes. And what is done there is something is done to prevent the murder of many, many innocent individuals and the corruption of the people of God. That, Teresa, would be diametrically opposed to what is taught in the Quran, because the Quran does tell you it is a directive. It is not something that is based at a point in time, a historical instance that you can find like in the Old Testament. This is a directive that those that believe in the book, which are not just us, but even the Jews, those really, they should be approached in a manner that is not very friendly at all. They should be approached with violence, and that is a directive. And really, there's really no way around that.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yes, it does, for the big picture. But why then were 3,000 to 5,000 people killed? Were they during the Spanish Inquisition? Were they all that evil? Okay.
Well, remember what you did. You had one question. You were touching upon the Old Testament, and now you hopped on to another thing, talking about the Inquisition. What I would recommend that you do is look up the numbers that you looked up there. No amount of numbers of people that are murdered are acceptable. I agree with you there, but you have to realize that this was not sanctioned by the church. This was done by the state. If you look at that time that point in history, Teresa, you can look up any theologian, and believe me, there are writings that exist. Look at what the popes wrote at that time. None of them are sanctioning the murder of people. None of them are saying, you know what, we need to murder Jews, we need to murder Protestants, we need to murder individuals here and there. And I would add one thing for you, Teresa. There were not just Jews that were murdered. Catholics were murdered as well during the Inquisition, quite a bit of them as well.
Yeah, actually, Teresa, that's a huge topic that you really need like a whole show to dive into. And actually, we did do a show on the Inquisition with Rob Corzine, so you can check that out on the virginmostpowerfulradio.org website. And but we got to move on. But thank you for the question. And if you have further questions, please give us a call.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you. We appreciate it. Okay, William, we talked about the incarnation. We talked about Christ suffering, dying. And we just went over the Quranic material that Jesus didn't die. And you showed how, people, our enemies, or non-Catholics, attest even that Christ was crucified. Let's go to the third one, the resurrection.
Definitely. And when we go here, Gary, I want to go with what the Quran says first. So kind of like turning things around a little bit. The Quran, if you go to section 355, you read, God said, Jesus, I will take you back and raise you up to me. Talking about a different kind of raising up. I will purify you of the disbelievers. To the day of resurrection, I will make those who follow you superior to those who disbelieved. Then you will all return to me, and I will judge between you regarding your differences. And then if you hop on over to 1933 in the Quran, Jesus said, peace was on me the day I was born and will be on me the day I die and the day I am raised to life again. The Quran, Gary, believes that Jesus died. He was taken up to heaven to be with God, which remember, they don't believe him to be his father because they take it in a carnal type of manner. So really, there is no bodily resurrection. There was no bodily death either, really. He was taken up to be with God. His day of resurrection, as we talked about earlier, is really a judgment day return, not a bodily resurrection, as you know, Gary, as we very firmly believe in, and as we can show from the Bible and from the earliest followers of Jesus, was a fundamental belief in the faith.
Yeah, very good. I always wondered about that point, William, because
yes.
I knew that the Quran says he wasn't crucified, and I think in the Hadiths they say that like another person, a lookalike, was crucified in his stead. But
yes.
Obviously he couldn't have been resurrected if he didn't die in the flesh.
Some say it was Judas Iscariot that was crucified.
Interesting. Yeah, very good. So what does the Bible have to say about the resurrection?
I love going to Paul, Gary, and the reason why, I'm going to tell you why, and great apologetic tact. A Muslim will try to argue that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John have been very, very corrupted. They'll tell you, you've got to prove your point from the letters that are authentic of Paul. And 1 Corinthians they consider to be authentic because most liberal theologians will toss out the Gospels and they'll say Corinthians predates them. Fine. We can hop to 1 Corinthians 15 and reread. Now I remind you, brethren, in what terms I preach to you the gospel, which you received, in which you stand, by which you are saved, if you hold it fast, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures. He was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he also appeared to me. For I am the least of the apostles, unfit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. Tell me what you think, Gary. But I think Paul is very clear here. This is not a spiritual type of non-carnal resurrection. Right. Jesus truly bodily rose from the dead.
Yeah. I don't. It's. I'm always dumbfounded at people who could try to read a spiritual resurrection into that.
They're really, to me, Gary, there's no way. I mean, what is Paul saying? He says, some will say, how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come? And then in 35, excuse me, he tells you with what body. He hops on over to verse 40. He talks about a difference between heavenly and earthly bodies, and he says that the body is an imperishable, glorious one. So really, when he says in verse 42, also the resurrection of the dead, it is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. He's talking about a real body there, Gary. There's no way around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And William, one thing I love about your apologetics is it really underscores the importance of the witness of the early church in history. Because someone could say, okay, well, fine, that's just you Christians say he rose from the dead. Muslims say he didn't. And by the way, we should also point out that Islam came about like 7 centuries after the time of Christ, where the Gospels were written almost immediately after the resurrection. But, even if you put those two and you're not really sure which one's true, it's kind of, we have the trump card in regards to the early church fathers, don't we?
We do, Gary. We do, because one example, if you look at one Clement was a bishop of Rome. He knew these individuals personally, heard them preach, heard them talk about the gospel. He tells us the Lord, talking about Christ, continually proves to us that there shall be a future resurrection, of which he has rendered the Lord Jesus Christ the first fruits by raising him from the dead. As you pointed out, Gary, we can look at the very earliest witnesses, those that knew, those that were the most acquainted with Jesus Christ, those that heard them preach. They heard them. They sat probably at campfires, Gary, enjoying some good food and good drink as they heard them talk about Christ. And they are then passing this on to us in a wonderfully preserved fashion that, as we know, Gary, you can find in the beautiful Catholic Church.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and not only Clement, but I mean even Ignatius. He had some powerful things to say as well.
Oh, definitely. When he's writing to the Smyrnians, remember he's writing to individuals that he tells us have heard the gospel. So he's emphasizing. He's saying, "I salute you all, individually and together, in the name of Jesus Christ, in his flesh and blood, by his suffering and resurrection, fleshly and spiritually, in union with God and with you." So if anybody wants to tell you Christ rose only spiritually, fine. But what does the Bible and what do the early church mean by spiritually? They mean that is a truly bodily, fleshly resurrection.
Yeah, very good. Wow. The hour has flown once again, William. How can people get a hold of your all your great stuff?
They can go to www.patristicpillars.com, Gary, and there on the page, they can find a lot of debates. I offer them all for free. Debates and a link to a lot of talks that can download, and anything that I'm doing in the future, I have it right there on the front page.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, William, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me on, Gary.
All right. That's William Albrecht, ladies and gentlemen. Some very interesting stuff with the Quran, New Testament, an area that I think a lot of Catholics aren't familiar with. And coming up tomorrow, we're going to talk about another area that I think Catholics aren't familiar with either, and that's Mormonism. You have these nicely dressed young men come to your door with a copy of the Book of Mormon. Who are they? What are they about? Well, Catholic Brian Merce is going to join us tomorrow, and we're going to talk about Mormonism, what it's all about. Who are they? How did it come about? Lots of great stuff. So, man, it's already time to shut down the Midwest Command Center here. Turn off the dojo lights. Coming up next, you guessed it. It's the show that started it all. The Terry and Jesse Show is coming up next. High intensity Catholic talk. And I hope everybody has a great day. And God willing, we'll see each other tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.